Good afternoon. Welcome back to BTN TV. My name is Donna Irildi. I am the Senior Editor for Transportation at Business Travel News. And I am here today with Peter Grover, who is the Managing Director of Europe for TripBam. Thank
Morning,
you for joining
Donna.
us. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How about you?
Great. Good to see you again. And I want to talk a little bit about TripBam recently came out with its market snapshot. And the subtitle of it was Sky High Rates Edition. Tell us a little bit about the rates and what's going on and what you're seeing trend-wise.
I think you and I last spoke sort of halfway through last year, and the world has changed a lot since then, that's for sure. So we're seeing rates on average over here about £20 above per night what they were in 2019, and we certainly didn't see that coming, certainly not yet. So yeah, rates overall are very, very high, and it's having a big impact on people's travel programs.
In terms of where they're staying?
It doesn't seem to be affecting where they're staying. There's a lot of travel avoidance, I think, coming on,
Okay.
and a lot of travel managers are burning through their travel budgets fairly quickly. So yeah, we're seeing some of that take place. But we're also seeing is that people aren't flying necessarily to where they used to fly to. So it used to be that if you had a head office in Geneva, everyone would fly to Geneva for a meeting because that's where you got to meet all of the key personnel. What seems to be happening now is there's much more travel to sort of secondary and tertiary cities for groups to meet. So, they'll all meet in Barcelona or Orlando, or they'll go somewhere, somewhere a little different to where they always used to go. And that again is having an impact because they wouldn't necessarily have negotiated their best rates in those destinations, whereas they probably normally would at the hotel next door to their head office.
Right.
So we're seeing that again is throwing things a little bit out of kilter. And like I say, I think the number of travellers is more or less where the travel managers thought it would be, but the cost of each one of those trips across both air and hotel is about 20 to 30% above where it was in 2019.
What kind of effect do you think that will have on quarters 3 and 4 for travel?
Right, so 3 and 4, we think a couple of things might happen. Number one is we think some companies will literally just run out of travel budget and put a stop on any further travel. We also, and we don't have a crystal ball, but we do see Q3 and 4, particularly 4 perhaps, where we'll start to enter a global recession. And we think that's going to have quite an impact on demand as well. We'll see that demand tail off considerably. And we may well see some of these hotel prices and airfares decrease again towards the end of this year. I don't want to commit to it, but I think if I was looking to negotiate rates, I'd probably try and not do it now, where we think they're at their peak, and maybe put it off, kick the can down the road a little way if they can, to sort of Q3, Q4, where we think things are more likely to normalise. We also think, particularly on the hotel side, that we'll see more staff coming back into the system. So we think the actual supply of hotel rooms, particularly in the UK and around London, may well increase as well, where at the moment some hotels aren't fully open. They've only got sort of 2 or 3 floors because they literally just can't staff up in order to do so.
Right. Are you seeing, what differences are you seeing between the different regions, like North America versus Europe?
We saw North America started to, let me start off where we are. Currently, we were about 20% below the level of nights and bookings that we were in 2019. That was sort of a month or so ago. We've seen that dip again. I don't know if it's because of the rise of the pandemic again in certain places. I don't know if it's the effects of some of the war in Ukraine, or just that tightening of budgets, or the stress and angst of actually going through an airport and that whole experience, which isn't very pleasant at the moment, particularly around some of the European airports.
Okay.
So yeah, we're seeing a very mixed picture. The US market was stronger, and that's tailed off a bit. In Europe, again, it was very strong, but is tailing off a little bit once more as well. So where we were flying high in terms of the numbers, it's just plateauing a little versus where it was in 2019.
Now, you had mentioned a minute ago about having negotiations hold off until later. What are you actually seeing travel buyers doing right now?
At the moment, travel buyers seem to be going through the usual routine of going out to RFP. I think if they're lucky, those RFPs will be going out in sort of October, November, but it does appear that we're getting ready for quite a busy RFP season. And I think hoteliers will be looking, as will airlines, looking to increase their rates rather than just have them roll over, which they've done for the last couple of years. So yeah, I do think it's going to be quite an interesting negotiation. Also, we're seeing a lot of centralization of some of those negotiations as well. So you're not necessarily going out to the individual hotels that still don't necessarily have enough staff to respond to every RFP request. We're seeing some of that now centralized at the head office, and they'll respond on behalf of somebody, particularly the smaller hotels in their chains.
It'd be interesting. I spoke to a few buyers recently, and a majority of them wanted to roll over rates and had planned to do so. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not the suppliers
It will be very interesting to see how much resistance comes from, like I say, particularly the hoteliers and as much the airlines in terms of trying to push that back. But.
Right. Talk a little bit about the global air trends. You mentioned some of the rates and stuff, but that was a new service you were offering last time we spoke.
That's right.
And how is that advancing, and how is it going at TripBam?
It's rolling out very well. So again, it's a global product, so it can be used in any of our markets. We're finding a discount in a significant number of bookings, and it's proving very successful, and not dissimilar story to that we found with hotels. And we're also adding in rate audits. So we're making sure that where you have negotiated a rate, you do actually get it, which particularly in these rising rate times isn't always the case. So if various suppliers can withdraw some of those offers that they perhaps made when times weren't quite so good, we're definitely seeing some of that happening.
Okay. And what about booking volumes, and by vertical and by company type?
That's again an interesting question. We've seen pretty much all verticals come back in a similar way, so to the same sort of ratio that they were before. We are still seeing the small and medium-sized enterprises leading the charge, though. So the very large organisations haven't come back as quickly to travel as the smaller ones, perhaps because their need is greater to get out there and get earning some money for the business, and some of the larger ones can wait a little while. But yeah, there's definitely a trend where it's the small and middle-sized companies that have responded to travel first, and some of the industrials came back quicker. Financial a little less so, but overall most sectors have come back in a similar way.
Okay. And any other trends you're seeing?
Like I say, the biggest trend is that trend away from flying to head office. So We're seeing people are having high volumes of traffic and of overnight stays in cities and places they wouldn't typically have seen. So we are still seeing the Middle East do very well. We're seeing parts of the US, Orlando and Miami and those types of cities are doing very well, and slightly less to the key cities like New York and London and Berlin and Frankfurt and Hong Kong. But yeah, we're seeing the third sort of secondary and tertiary cities come to the prominence more.
And are, with those, as you said, they may not be in travel programs necessarily from the past. Are you seeing those clients start to do negotiations for static rates, or is it more dynamic?
Well, again, what I think is still difficult to predict is whether these trends will continue, or whether once folks start going back into their head offices, those destinations may not be used any further. So I think it's quite difficult because, again, there's sort of this scattergun, and it's not consistent for you to be able to negotiate with all of those properties in that way. So I think for now, people are sort of sitting back and waiting to see whether those secondary cities remain sort of paramount, or whether things revert to where they were in 2019.
Right, so things are changing quickly.
Well, like I said, and I think I mentioned to you, the presentation I'm going to give tomorrow, the data that's in it from 2 weeks ago, I'm now doing a complete volte-face and coming out with a different piece of advice to that we thought 2 weeks ago. So things are changing very, very quickly, and I think that's a good point, is that you need to make sure you've got some continuous sourcing in both your air and your hotels, so that you can adapt and flex and be nimble, because it does seem very hard to predict where we're going to be in 6, 9, 12 months' time.
Great. And any final recommendations for travel managers out there?
I think just batten down the hatches, get ready for a tough negotiating season, like you've said. Use rate caps, and where people start to exceed rate caps, offer alternative properties that are in your program, and prove to hotels and airlines that you can shift share. Because if you can show that you can move business to them, not that they just get the same amount they would have gotten anyway, then that makes them a lot more amenable to negotiate discounts than they would otherwise be. So it's that being able to prove that you can move travelers into their properties or onto their flights and away from the others.
Great. Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. BTN appreciates it. And we're going to head back to the show floor.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.